All right, well, welcome everyone. We're so thankful to have you here today. My name is Kelsey Erickson, and I'm the Executive Director of Athlete Health and Wellness at USA Cycling. And you can see here the schedule of events. I'm very quickly going to be handing the Zoom mic over to our USA Cycling CEO and President, Rob DeMartini, and he's gonna give us some opening remarks and really kick this series off for us today. I'll be serving as the MC, so I will be popping back and forth throughout the conversation, but I really just want to start by saying thank you. We're happy to have you, and this is the beginning of what we hope will be a very challenging, convicting, and action-oriented series of conversations. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Rob.
Kelsey, thank you. And I'm just going to take a few minutes and cover 5 brief areas. And the first is just simply a welcome. I believe we've got over 150 people connecting with us today. We're very pleased to have been working with, for I think almost 2.5 years now, Ashland Johnson and her team at the Inclusion Playbook. I want to thank our sponsors that help make this possible, our speakers and panelists. Today you'll hear from Ashland and from David Lipscomb, but over the new schedule, and I'll speak to that in a minute, you'll hear from a number of other people. I also want to thank Kelsey and the entire DEI task force that from the beginning was made up about 20% of people from the USA Cycling staff and about 80% from the cycling community. And it started, I think, back in March or April. And they've been instrumental in both shaping this, but more importantly, shaping our overall DEI effort. So my thanks to them. And then I want to just say, you know, the shift to virtual was a little disappointing for Kelsey and I, and I'm sure others, that I don't think we made it till last Friday. We were certainly hoping this would come together, but as I thought about it over the weekend, I'm optimistic that this may actually work better, that if we go through a monthly discussion, we'll be able to focus in on each discussion more specifically. And I think I hope the group will get more comfortable with each other, so we challenge each other and end up with a longer lasting impact that has more action and, quite frankly, less talk. So I'm optimistic that the virtual format will work. And as Kelsey and I have laid out, our plan is to come together in person when it's safer and more appropriate. A couple other people I want to thank, just groups. First of all, USA Cycling members, volunteers, coaches, and officials. USA Cycling simply does not function without that group. And that while that group challenges us regularly, we appreciate that challenge. And I want to thank you for that contribution. On the subject of feedback, you know, we appreciate it. Sometimes it's supportive, sometimes it's critical. It's always heard and it's always helpful. And I will tell you that my leadership team, me personally, and our dedicated staff takes your input very seriously and you know, attempts to channel it and act on it as we can. The broader cycling community, whether you're involved in USA Cycling or whether you're not, we believe we're in service of you in either case, and we appreciate hearing from you on how we can do better. And then, as I said before, specifically our sponsors, SRAM, Strava, Allied, Trek, Canyon, Vittorio, Hyperice, People for Bikes, Zwift, and Hinshaw Design. You've all helped make this happen, and we do appreciate it. The next area I want to cover is just what are our intentions and hopes for the discussion that I'll say starts today, but you all know it's been going on for some time, but in this format, it does start today. And I thought a lot about this over the last month as I was preparing for this, that, you know, as an outcome of the pandemic, as an outcome of the George Floyd tragedy, the women's parity and equality movement that's been going on for some time, and most recently, the damaging legislation that aims to divide this country, I'm encouraged and optimistic that these discussions and actions will help create a healthier sport, and quite frankly, in parentheses, a healthier society. And at USA Cycling, we want to do our small part to contribute to that better good. And I hope that's what is something that we move towards through these discussions. On a personal level, I thought I'd share with you what are my hopes and expectations from this discussion. And, I have long considered myself a supporter of inclusion. I wouldn't have worded it that way a few years ago, I'm sure, but I have felt that. And I'll tell you personally, this past year has challenged me to re-examine whether I personally live up to that expectation. I realize clearly that saying you're supportive is not sufficient, and it's no longer enough. It probably never was enough, but it's no longer enough. So I'm hoping to learn, to grow, to take more action, and to live up to that ideal that I've held in my head, that I am supportive, but I've been forced or challenged to question this year. And I know that the world will be better if we make progress, and USA Cycling is a small part of society, but we have a role and a responsibility, and I want to personally make progress towards it. The last thing I'll say is I have a request for everybody that's here, that participates now and will participate in the future. Please engage in the conversation. This is not our agenda, it's yours. It's not our content creation, it's yours. And it's not our point of view, it's actually yours. I have challenged my staff to be here to learn, and we're not here to tell. We're here to do a lot of listening. So I'm not going to say much after my opening comments, but please engage in the conversation. I know that we're going to try to. And please push each other and push me, because I need the help. I want the help. And while sometimes it's not necessarily packaged the way I'd love, it doesn't matter. It's important. And if you're heard, I can commit to you, we will listen and do our best to incorporate the input we get from our members and our non-members in the cycling community. So thank you for taking a couple hours to be here today. I'm sorry we had to change it, but I'm optimistic that the format will actually work better. I'm looking forward to Ashland and her team's work. As I said before, I think Ashland had you in the facility about 2.5 years ago for some direct training. And my work since then and through this process, I'm very impressed with what your team's capable of doing. And I'm very excited to hear from David Lipscomb and his ideas. He's got a broad DEI background as well as a cycling background, and the two of those coming together couldn't serve us any better. So thank you for being here this morning, and I look forward to the discussion. Kelsey?
Thank you, Rob. All right, so just to reiterate what Rob said, this is an opportunity for us to reimagine the way that we were planning on hosting this conversation. And we had to pivot pretty quickly, exactly 1 week ago, and reimagine how is this conversation going to be had, and how do we engage and include as many people as possible. And as Rob alluded to, in person was definitely the way we had hoped. But things happen and we adapt and adjust. And as he mentioned, I believe this is an opportunity for us to ensure that this is more than a conversation. It's an ongoing series of conversations, growth, experience, and commitment. And that being said, we will be using the original conference agenda as the framework to guide this series of conversations. So the goal of the conference is to create a more inclusive sport of cycling for all. And we're going to focus on 4 key underrepresented communities in cycling over the course of these conversations. And those remain the BIPOC community, LGBTQIA+, disabled athletes, and women. So each of the conversations that we're going to have starting today and ongoing until we're able to meet in person will be centered around how do we create welcoming and inclusive spaces for those 4 communities in particular. And so what I'd love to do now, before I hand over to David for the keynote, is I first of all wanted to remind us of the goal of this conversation, or this series of conversations, which is ultimately to create a more inclusive sport in the future. We want to collectively commit as an industry to creating an inclusive sport for all. And one of the things that we asked our registrants when we had you sign up to be a part of this conversation was 3 specific questions. And to be honest, I really didn't know if we would get any responses. I know from my own experience, when I register for an event, I want to put as little information in as possible because I want to be done registering as quickly as possible. But I'm very happy to say that you all are not like me. And I actually ended up with 11 pages of responses in relation to the 3 questions that we posed to you. And so I'd love to take an opportunity to share with you what you all shared with us. So Tom, if you could please put my slides up. The first question that we asked you, actually, there's a question before that. A couple slides earlier, please. Yeah, perfect. The first question we asked is, why are you here? Why do you want to be a part of this conversation? And obviously I'm generalizing the responses because I can't share with you 11 pages of font 10. But one of the biggest things that came through is because the reason that you're here is you want to see change. You want the sport to move towards a more inclusive sport or future. But what was particularly interesting and what I really appreciated was that it wasn't just that the majority of you wanted to see change. Importantly, you wanted to be an active agent for change. You're showing up today because you want to be a part of creating that change. And so I think that that's really telling of, those of us that are on this call today and that will be on the calls in the future. We're here because we not only see an opportunity for change, but we're not willing to sit by and wait for somebody else to create it. We want to be a part of creating that change. And so that's a really encouraging thing to see. And the other words that came through as far as why people are attending, there was a lot of people that mentioned they're here to learn, they're here to listen, to learn how to become an ally. Many people talked about they want to gain knowledge and tools and things that they can take back to their workplace or even their personal lives and activate to, again, really be a part of cultivating this change towards a more inclusive future for the sport. And so those were really the key themes that came through as far as why you're here. And I'm sure for all of us, we have a slightly different reason as to why we're here. But we're thankful that you're here, and we hope that we'll be able to engage more and more people over the coming months as we grow on and develop on the content that we discuss and hear about today. The next question that we asked was, what does diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you? And what you can see here is some of the key words that came through that were repeated throughout the responses that we received to this question. So there was a lot around, creating equitable opportunities, equitable access, making sure that people feel supported, that they feel like they belong, that the sport is fair, that everyone gains influence, that has a voice, that people feel comfortable and seen and appreciated. And I think all of those words are such a great picture of what diversity, equity, and inclusion can and should and hopefully means within the sport of cycling, but also just within society at large. But there were also a number of images that came through in the responses. And so if we go to the next slide, I'd love to just kind of touch on what those images were. And really, these were ones that, again, you provided to us. This is not what we created or content that we gained, but this is what you told me through your responses. So again, in response to this question of what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to me, one of the things that came through very commonly and not surprisingly was that it's about identifying barriers and removing those. So eliminating as many barriers to access and inclusion in cycling as possible. And I think for most of us, that's an analogy or an image that we probably think of and have talked about quite often over the past months and year. Is this idea of, before we can change the sport, we first have to identify what are those barriers that are stopping people from feeling like or experiencing a sense of they're invited and they're welcome to be a part of the sport. So one was barriers, and that came through often. The other one that I thought was really interesting was, and powerful, was this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion is about having a seat at the table. So it's about creating this seat at the table for everyone and making sure that everyone has access to that table. But what was interesting and what I think is so insightful is that many people talked about how it's not good enough to just make sure that there's a table or a chair at the table for everyone. But importantly, that person that gets the chair needs to also be invited to help create the menu. And then they also need to be invited to enjoy the meal that it provides. So it's not about just making sure that there's a seat at the table for everyone, but it's about making sure that those seats also carry the same amount of influence, power, respect, visibility, and voice as every other chair at the table, and then also that they get to experience and reap the same benefits and outcomes and sense of community and inclusion as every other seat at that table. So I thought that was a really great kind of analogy and imagery of this idea of it's not just about having a seat at a table, but it's making sure that that seat has equal weight as every other seat at that table, and really removing that head seat and making sure that it's more of that inclusive circular type table. So I love that image. And again, that came from you. And then the next and final slide was another image that really came through. And this wasn't necessarily something that was said explicitly by any one person, but it was more kind of the image that started to come to my mind as I read the pages and pages of responses that you all provided to us. And that was the idea of the difference between being welcome versus being invited. And I don't know about what all of you and kind of your background and what you've been working on over the past few months, but in conversations that I've been having as I kind of have facilitated our DEI task force and our internal efforts, is people commonly said, you know, and this isn't just at USA Cycling, but in general, you know, like, well, everyone's welcome. Cycling is welcoming to all. And on a basic level, yeah, maybe that is true. But what really emerged from kind of the responses that I heard from you all is there's a big difference between being welcomed versus being invited. And to me, the difference is that if somebody's welcome to, let's say, an event or a party, it's on them to identify that opportunity. They have to become aware of the fact that that party or event is happening. You know, let's say it's a cycling event. It's on the part of the attendee, or let's say the outsider, to become aware of and then take it upon themselves to show up at that cycling event. And that's really different from the concept of being invited, because when you're invited, it's the responsibility of the insider or the host to extend that invitation to you, to make you aware of the opportunity and to make it clear to you that you are not only welcome, but you're invited. We want you there, and we're going to create a channel and an avenue and an opportunity for you to be there. And so I love that illustration. And I think maybe that's, for me, that's what's kind of underpinning the conversations as we head over these next month, is this idea of we want to move from a community and an industry and a sport where we say people are welcome to, no, you're not just welcome, you're invited. And you're invited, and we're going to make sure that once you get that invitation, we do everything in our power to make sure that you feel seen, heard, recognized, valued, you belong, and you're a part of that community. And so I think, you know, on a simple, putting it simply, that's what we're all here for. We're here to figure out how do we move from identifying barriers and hopefully overcoming those to actually actively inviting and welcoming people into the sport. And so that's the purpose of this series. And as I mentioned already, you know, this is a slightly new format, but I'm so thankful to all of you for choosing to engage with it, despite the fact that it's not kind of in the format that we had talked about even just 1 week ago. So thank you to our speakers and panelists who have been willing and able to pivot and be flexible and shift to this new format. Thank you to all of you that are here in attendance. And just so that you know, today's conversation is going to be predominantly us presenting, but in the months to come, and we'll touch on this at the end of the webinar, it's very much going to become a collaborative conversation and commitment and series of actions to move the sport forward. So we do, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but we do have the Q&A function available. If you have questions that you'd like to ask of those of us that are a part of today's conversation, please feel free to do so. We will be monitoring that, but we will keep the chat limited, and you will have the ability to contact us post-conversation as well. So with that, I'd like to say you are all invited, and we wouldn't be able to have this conversation without you. We as USA Cycling are here to listen and learn, and we're just thankful to have the industry together in one place to figure out how we as a cycling industry can make sure that every person is not just welcome, but invited into this sport. So without going any further, I am now going to hand it over to our keynote speaker, David Lipscomb. He is the CEO and head coach at CIS Training Systems, and he is here to share with us from his experience and his depth or wealth of knowledge and experience in the sport and in DEI. And we are so thankful to have him here with us. So David, I will hand it over to you.
Hello, folks, and welcome. First things first, I want to kind of clear the air a little bit. Thank you, Rob, for those powerful words. And I think what I'm most proud of you is that you've owned up to what you want to do and what you want to learn. That says a lot about you and your nature and where you want to take USA Cycling in the years going forward. Number two, Kelsey, it's been incredible working with you and ensuring this level of continuity and create some level of understanding in this clear space. I think what we try to find out is how do we truly engage in a conversation across the barriers to get people to understand that there's more to talk about than what we see. So I'm going to go through my thoughts, my perspective on how I see things from a diversity standpoint. But I first want to welcome you all to the 2021 USA Cycling Inclusion Conference and Series. As I said, I'm Coach David Lipscomb, CIS Training Systems. I've been in a space of diversity and inclusion for a number of years. Actually, I was a Vice President of Diversity for a large financial services firm from 2004 to 2008. And during that time, I experienced a lot of things. And a couple of these things I want to kind of share with you and how we can really move this conversation to a whole nother level. But what's unique about where I've been to where I am today is there's certain pieces of this conversation and diversity we continuously keep having. And I'm going to talk about why we keep having this type of conversation and how can we break through these types of barriers like Kelsey was talking about. How do we get through this understanding and create some levels of continuity and create a level of space and a safe space for people to be in. So slide 3, I want to kind of share with you what are some of these key takeaways that we're going to accomplish today in our conversation. I'm going to share with you some fun facts. All right, so I'm you kind of understand my style. Those who know me, I'm very animated by what I talk about because I have a passion for this work. Although I'm a cycling coach, I broke free of the corporate environment and went into coaching full time over the last 16 years in CIS Training Systems, but I never lost the passion for diversity. And here are certain things that I want to kind of share with you in this context of this conversation. Second thing would be these converging trends that are truly impacting the potential for the business to grow. And a lot of what we're talking about today is about how do we move people through a continuum of diversity and inclusion. We do that in CIS Training Systems all the time. How do we move people through this continuum of thought? Number 3, we're going to talk diversity, okay? We are definitely going to talk diversity, but we're going to talk about it in a very different perspective, in a huge type of conversation that most people would never even think about. Number 4, we're going to talk about diversity blind spots. And what does it do to the business? And understand how we utilize those blind spots for opportunities, okay? Number 5, as Kelsey was talking about, we want a seat at the table, folks. We want to be able to eat at the menu. But what about the idea of understanding how to break through the ceiling that seems to keep happening, not only in the workforce, but also in the pro level ranks? How do we bridge that gap? And a lot of these things that I will talk about today in our conversation is how do we look at this from a very strategic perspective? And lastly, how do we build a culture of inclusion? How do organizations build a culture of inclusion? How does cycling build a culture of inclusion? There's an opportunity to really gain insights and understanding how do we get to this next level and stop talking about the same things we talked about years ago. Okay, next slide, Tom. See, I think the unique thing around these fun facts is, now this is the fun part. So I'm going to go to my slides here. So just bear with me for a minute. It's a couple things to know. Fun facts. Number 1, did you know that cycling is not just for kids? Okay, as of the pandemic, there are more adults on our bicycles now than ever. And as a result of that, the space of cycling has exploded to a whole other level, to the point where we couldn't get bicycles. Remember that when people would say, hey, you know what, I want to get a bicycle, I can't get a bike, because it has changed the way we do things nowadays, because it's never going to change. It's always going to be different. It's going to go forward. Number 2, most children in America's largest cities state no longer have an Anglo-Saxon American cultural background, but more than 85% of bicycle riders are non-Hispanics and white. Wow. It's a powerful statement. It's a very powerful statement. Okay, number two, enthusiasts are driving growth, and the number of frequent and dedicated cyclists continues to grow. So I feel that this is where the split between recreational riders and racers create this data component. Next thing, the older riders are riding more miles. So, you know, if you look back, you know, I'm kind of 5 years prior to the baby boomer environment. I'm 52 years old. So those that were in this 1946 to 1964 range are really riding their bikes more than most people would ever think about. So a lot of the space is now being flooded with more older riders, and there's more opportunities for people to get engaged into the sport. So how do we ensure that we're understanding how we look at this kind of data component? And lastly, riding days for men have increased to the age of 65, while at the same time too, women are more and more engaged in cycling. So we hear these conversations, how do we get more people engaged? We got to know who's engaged. Now we have this kind of opportunity to kind of see those types of pieces of data components. All right, so from my experience, all right, I'm gonna tell you from my experience of where I've been, there's a couple of things back in 2004 when I was building this diversity strategies for the organization I worked for. We were seeing a lot of these trends that were happening. There was like kind of 5 of them, and I'll share with you what these 5 are here in the next slide. So Tom, go to the next slide. Here are these 5 trends, and these were prevalent back then, 2004 to 2021. They're still very prevalent to how businesses run and how people are engaged in diversity and inclusion. Number 1, real-time demographic shifts. 1. Number 2, employee and customer engagement is critical. If we're not engaging these 2 subsets of individuals, we're missing the opportunities to grow our businesses. Number 3, technology drivers are driving everything, every day, all day. So especially now, because everybody's online, technology drivers are making things better or less worse than what we thought they were, because now we're spending more time on the phone, or we're spending more time on our computers. Number 4, this market competition. You know, it's critical to understand how market competition is playing good, bad, or indifferent as it relates to growth of companies. And lastly, managing organizational change. Now, I'm going to go through a couple key things, and I'll tell you some more numbers where all of these 5 factors are in concern. But when we talk about managing organizational change, when it comes to a diversity and inclusion activity and what do you call it, practice or change management opportunity and initiative, when organizations change, what tends to happen is we work so hard to make the DNA happen inside of an organization, but when the organization changes based on leadership, certain things happen. People say, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. So we're going to change the whole focus and the mindset of what the work is supposed to be. Once again, folks, sorry, I get animated for the work that we're talking about, but I see these trends happening. And these were the trends I was talking about in 2004. It's still very prevalent today. So I'll give you some information. So real-time demographics. By 2055, we will have no single racial or ethnic majority. Wow. I'm gonna say that one more time. By 2055, the USA will not have a single racial or ethnic majority. Folks, what was will not be in short order. Write that down. Put that in your bailiwick for a minute. Number 2, another interesting fact is that women's roles in the labor force, including leadership positions, have grown dramatically. So we will definitely dig a little deeper into this conversation during our inclusion conversations over the next couple months. But this is critical because, as I will share a little later in our conversation, women make the decisions, folks. Women make the decisions. Let's not sugarcoat this. Women make the decisions. So if we understand the impact that individuals have inside of organizations, we have a better opportunity to grow and be more inclusive. Okay, here's another one. Lastly, is a perfect example of what we're talking about. The middle class of Americans and have a household is shrinking. So if we're talking about shrinking the middle class environment, that could really impact how cycling moves forward. Because if you're not in the middle class and you're at the upper class, great. But if you're in the low class, the price of bikes become a challenge for people to get involved in this level of sport. So what do we do? What do we do? And part of what we're going to talk about over these next couple of months is how can we change the modus operandi, what happens going forward? Okay, let's move forward to customer and employee engagement. So here's one for you, and I think you guys will like this one because I think it's very true, is the fact that social media is making and changing the definition of what we call fast. So I'll say that again. Social media is changing the way we think about what is fast. 5 seconds ago was too late. So when we think about 5 seconds is too late, what do we want to know now? And what do we need to know going forward? Because now social media is so prevalent and everybody's saying all types of things, and some are good, some are bad, truth be told. Number two, the online world is changing how customers expect businesses to be. And as a result, customers and consumers want personalized service. We can agree or disagree, but I agree because that's the truth. We all want service. We all want it now. So what do organizations need to do? And here's what we're talking about, USA Cycling and all other companies, and my company included, is how do we service our customers to the point of understanding what they want? And how can we change that and ensure that everybody's included in the conversation? As Kelsey said, we want more people at the dinner table. But if we are not looking at it from a holistic standpoint and we're missing these opportunities to see things from a holistic perspective, that's where the challenge then becomes. Okay, then when we also look at, and I'll tell you some things from an employee standpoint, a McKinsey study has shared that gender diverse companies are 21% more likely to experience above average profitability and 27% more likely to create long-term value than those that are not gender diverse. Let's say those numbers again. 21% are more likely to experience above level profitability. Money talks, folks. It's one. Then here's another one. Forbes have stated that inclusive teams make better decisions up to 87% of the time. That's big, 87% of the time. Now, when you look at these, and I think we're going to find this one interesting, as it relates to this 80% of the time that make better decisions, they also are 2 times faster to make this with half the meetings. Now, since the fact that we're all on Zoom all day, if we're not being effective in our meeting environment and we're not being more inclusive in what we're trying to talk about, we're spending too much time and not doing enough action, like Rob mentioned at the early part of the conversation. Too much talking and less action. So if we understand the impact of diverse teams and inclusive teams, we can make better decisions and to grow the business to a whole nother level. Lastly, decisions are made by and executed by diverse teams and groups deliver 60% better results. 60% better results. That's huge. That's not 2%, that's 60%. 60%. Okay. Couple key things. Another one around, I don't know if you all know who the Gartner Group is. Gartner Group purchased this company called CEB, who is the industry leader in providing best practice and talent management insights. Okay, so I'll tell you one thing that they wrote, is that they have found that highly diverse and inclusive organizations result in 26% increase in team collaboration, 18% increase in team commitment. See, okay, being an owner of a business, and I know Rob understands this too, because he's the owner of this entire environment as USA Cycling and other organizations that are in this conversation today, and those that are listening will understand this concept. We were doing more with less. So we need to really, really do a better job of aligning ourselves and getting the best out of everybody. But everybody needs to be counted in the conversation. Everybody has to have a voice. Those who don't want to speak, we have to find ways to help them speak, because we all have an idea, right? We all have a talent to do the work that we do, but if we're not doing what we're doing and we're not being asked the questions, how are we expected to grow? How are we expected to grow? So let's talk about technology drivers, okay? This is the one that's really unique. Technology drives outcomes for better customer engagement. If we're not understanding the impact of technology and how it's driving customer engagement, we are losing the battle. We're losing the battle, okay? I'll take you back. Here's a story. I like to tell stories. Like to tell stories. Number one, when I was in technology, before I got in corporate America in HR, the whole idea around Y2K, the year 2000, remember the year 2000 was this big old, okay, what are we gonna do? You know, the clocks are gonna change, this, that, and the third, and nothing's gonna work, okay? But what happened was that was a true technology reset. The technology reset was clear, we can't do things on antiquated systems anymore. That's all well and true today. We can't do business on antiquated systems. I'll say it again. We can't do well in our businesses with antiquated systems. And in turn, either makes or breaks the way that people collaborate with one another, right? So look at that. We're all here on this Zoom call talking about what we're talking about, and we're all connected from all over the world, wherever we're at, and we're as clear as day, as clear as day. It's like we're in the same room together. Back in 2000 and back in 1999 and in 2000, that was not even heard of. Organizations were like, okay, well, we can't do work and have people outside the office anymore. Well, now look at us. We're all in our houses doing what we're doing. Because now the mindset has now changed, and technology has driven that conversation because it was forced to happen because of the pandemic. I don't like talking about this, but it's true, okay? Another couple things. The first thing around change management initiatives like diversity and inclusion, we have to look at this program as more of a broad-based approach to data, because data drives action, right? Data drives the action. If we understand what the action is, and we're measuring the trends that are happening, once again, these are trends, technology is a trend, then we're moving in the right direction. So my mindset is, back in 2004, when I did this work between 2004, 2008, is I thought about it from a business perspective. How can I drive these numbers? And how can I create more value for the business and for individuals inside the business? Okay. So then when we look at market competition, clear example, if we're not doing what we're supposed to do, your competition is taking your lunch. I'll say it again. If we're not doing what we're supposed to do, as it relates to our talent, as it relates to our customers, as it relates to all these types of things in the communities in which we want to do business in, someone else is going to take our lunch. Big statement, big statement, big statement, big statement. Last but not least, as it relates to managing organizational change, I will talk about this till I'm blue in the face. Okay, not blue in the face. Okay, I won't say that. But anyway, one thing to always remember, that organizational change is all about change management, okay? So the clear thing around diversity and inclusion in the work that we do, okay? And I still do the work, even though I'm a coach, I still do this work because I have passion for it. It's important that it is infused in the DNA of a company, because if we don't do the work correctly, what tends to happen is those that leave the organization in leadership positions tend to say, okay, the next person that comes in, I'm not going to focus on that anymore. And all the work has gone to the wayside. So what do? We have to do our best to ensure that we're including more policies and procedures and practices for a more inclusive dialogue, and so that people can be counted across the table, okay? So here we go. That's all the good stuff. Now we're going to talk diversity. So next slide. Next slide. There we go. Let's talk diversity. All right. So this is my fun thing I always say. I was saying this back when I was doing this work because it's so very true. This is not major surgery, folks. This is not a root canal. We're going to talk diversity for a minute. We're going to talk diversity. Next slide, Tom. If you look at this wheel, this is what they call the diversity wheel. Okay, it has some really unique components to it. Okay, so we look at this and I'll explain it at a high level, 30,000 foot level. Okay, so we won't go to the muck and mire of here, but we're going to go a little higher and we're going to take a look at this model. A lot of times people think, as soon as they hear the word diversity, they think gender and race. That's true, right? That is true. But however, if you look at the model here, folks, there's age, there's gender, there's race, there's ethnicity, there's national origin, there's physical qualities and abilities. That's the primary dimensions of diversity. However, there are secondary dimensions of diversity. So when you look at this outside of the wheel here, let's talk about a few things. Organizational role, critical. If we're talking about from a business perspective inside of a company, organizational role and classification makes sense. For those that want to move up through the ranks in an organization, organizational role and classification is critical. One, thinking styles. Everybody has a different type of thinking style, okay? Totally true. Another one, work background, personal habits, a political ideology. Okay, and when I started working with Kelsey last August, and happy anniversary there, Kelsey, number one, is that we talked about when I was coaching her to work at this type of level. A lot of what we're talking about is this political savoir-faire and understanding that this work is super tough because you got to deal with people's thought and how they think about the work and how they think about what they think they know, what they don't know. So the biggest challenge that we're faced with in this space is getting people to understand that there's a broader perspective to this, huge perspective to this. We all come, the idea is to try to find a common ground to understand how to move this needle, okay? So as you see in this diversity wheel, there's more here to talk about. There's more here to talk about. The last piece here, I'm going to say in perspective, the military experience, that's a totally untapped talent that most organizations aren't tapping into. Think about these folks that are in military. They are focused, intent people. That's what businesses need. They need people who are focused, people who get the work done, okay? Clear. Next slide. So I think the other thing is, let's talk about another level of diversity. Now that we talked about these other components and these variables around it, I want you folks to be very aware of what happens here in this level of diversity, because everybody knows what a blind spot is, right? When you're driving your car, you know what I mean? You see this, that, and the third, and you're on your bicycle, or you're on your bicycle and, you know, the car doesn't see you, kind of like what this truck is doing, because he doesn't see the riders next to him. This is exactly what diversity is all about. If we're not looking at things from a broader perspective, these are blind spots that could create better business opportunities for all of us, okay? So next slide there, Tom. So a diversity blind spot, as defined as what I see is, it's a blind spot in the context of diversity in business is a missed diversity business opportunity. So I'll say that again. A blind spot in the context of diversity in business is a missed diversity related business opportunity. It's huge. It's huge. That's how I think. That's how I think. And a lot of times, if we don't look at these blind spots and things just kind of run in front of us and we don't pay attention to these very clear things, we're missing so much. We're just missing so much here. We're missing so much. Next slide there, Tom. So here's a model I came up with this week. And I want to kind of see this correlation between workforce in cycling, and where is the bottleneck or the challenges that we're being faced with. And a lot of what Kelsey said at the beginning of her conversation is, oh, we want more people at the table. But what tends to happen here is there's a glass ceiling that we need to talk about, folks. Let's talk about it from a corporate perspective. Growing up in the corporate America, I know this model because I was at tier 2. I was at an executive level, so I got it. I understood what it was. But a lot of what happened was where a lot of times people have a difficult time getting to the tier 2 in corporate America is because it's so super hard to get there, folks. It's super hard. And those that make it are people who don't quit, regardless of where they are, what ethnic background they are. Those individuals who have a non-defeatist attitude and a no-quit attitude make it because they figure out ways to make it. Okay, so let's talk tier 4, tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. So tier 4, when you look at diverse representation, there are more opportunities for positions that are available for diverse individuals. Why? Because there's more here. There's more positions available. So let's go to the right here. Look at clubs and individuals. Exact same thing. There's more clubs and more individuals that have diverse representation. So when people say to me, hey, coach, there's no diversity in cycling, who said that? What do you mean? There is diversity here. You got to look for it because it is here. Let's talk tier 3. Managers and supervisors, when they get to that level, there's visible diversity and category racing for teams and individuals in tier 3 in diversity in cycling. It's there. But here's the challenge. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. We all have heard this story before. It's easier, and this is my thought, when you talk about basketball. I'll talk about basketball as a good example. In the inner cities, I live in New York City, I live in Brooklyn. It's easier for Brooklyn and inner cities to build a basketball court than there is to put a pool. Why? Because of the upkeep. It's easier to do. So when we look at cycling overall, part of the challenge is, okay, now that there's so much technology out here, the bikes are getting more and more expensive. Remember the conversation I had earlier in our dialogue that the middle class is shrinking. Here it is, folks. Here it is. If we want to get more people at the elite level of cycling, that's the reality, folks. The middle class is shrinking. There's not money is either at the top level or there's no money at the bottom level. So what do we do? What do we have to do when it relates to the partnerships that we bring into the factor of cycling? Something has to truly change. The margins are so small and businesses want to make money, but where's the give and take? So let's talk tier 2. Okay, so tier 2 is where this glass ceiling happens. So tier 2 in workforce diversity it's either, do you have a mentor inside the organization that you can talk to, that you can trust, all right? That won't, I hate to say it this way, folks, that won't backstab you. And I know we've all had this situation happen before where you trust a person to be an advocate for you, and it doesn't go the way that you wanted it to. So then when you look at the glass ceiling in cycling is when you get to this Olympic Games and road and track nationals, you have to have a coach. I'm telling you, you have to have a coach that's a good coach, okay? You have to spend a little bit more money than what you used to have to get to that next level. And a lot of that, the glass ceiling is about positioning. It's about positioning. And who do you know and who don't you know? That's what happens in organizations all the time. So you see the parallels between the two. So then you look at tier 1, the board, there's lacking visible diversity because it's just a small group of people. So even in cycling, in the UCI and World Tour races, it's exactly the same. So these models are exactly the same. So how do we break that? that's what we're going to talk about over these next few months, is how are we going to be able to elevate people to the next tier of cycling if we don't understand what this model looks like, because this is real talk. This is real. Okay, next slide. Okay. So how do we build this culture of inclusion? Well, let's just take it for really what it is. Let's take it for really what it is. So building a culture of inclusion takes energy to do. It takes energy. It takes a lot of work. And Kelsey and I, we have talked about this every Monday over the last year. It's a lot of hard work. And those that are in the space that are driving diversity, it's a lot of work. Because you have to, you're not just changing or working on policies and procedures and practices, you're trying to figure out how people are thinking, how they feel. Okay, that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort. With that being said, true diversity is on a continuum. So everyone has a portion of it, but not all of it. So like for me, I think about from a business perspective, Kelsey thinks about it from a different perspective. Lisa from Swift thinks about it from a different perspective, but we're all walking towards the same goal, is to make change, okay? For all these advances to require a joint effort from everyone, one pedal stroke at a time, folks, one pedal stroke at a time. It's gonna take time to do this. Okay, like I said, I've been in this space since 2004, and these things that I've talked about today are very relevant in what we're talking about. But everybody has to be able to walk in the same direction and be able to open up and have the dialogue. So in conclusion, as I'll conclude my conversation, the work of diversity and inclusion elevates engagement and also drives productivity and profitability for the long haul. So I ask you, okay, so this is what you should take away from what I just shared with you today. Do you and your organization have the passion to change and make a difference? I'm gonna say that again. Go to the next slide, by the way, Tom. Okay, and we'll go to this comment. And if so, tune in monthly and get some knowledge and gain some insights into this practice of the work that we do, because it's a lot of fun. It's truly a lot of fun. And it is tough at some points too, but it's a lot of fun to be able to collaborate and share ideas with people. So my last thought for you, for each individual, as you see on this slide here, all growth gain is on the other side of resistance. Okay, you will come against some folks or up against some folks who look at diversity and say, oh, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. But if you have the passion and the insight and the zeal to do the work and get it done, make it happen. Make it happen. I had a choice to get out of corporate America, and I did, but I still remain vigilant in the space of diversity and inclusion because it's that important. Thank you, folks, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was amazing, and happy anniversary to us.
That's
a very special day. No, thank you so much, David. I mean, so many key nuggets. My notepad is totally full, and I meet with you on a weekly basis. So I can only imagine how much other people have written down. As a reminder, we did record this. So if you didn't note everything David mentioned, lucky for you, you will probably get more. But I think, what really stood out to me, and especially on that end point there, was that idea of overcoming resistance and the fact that we're all going to face that, but that this matters and we have to be passionate. And David, you yourself have been someone that's really pushed me in that space, and actually everyone involved in this conference / now conversation series. I mean, one of the responses, and it's no secret that I was bummed when we had to shift and pivot virtual, and that was not the plan. That is not what we had wanted, but multiple people, including yourself, David, emailed me back and said, like, hey, it's just an obstacle and this is just part of the process. We pivot and we move forward. And I think you're exactly right. And I thank you for those words to me, and for everyone else that mentioned that as well. Is we're already seeing how, being creative, coming together, bringing together diverse perspectives, ideas, voices, and experiences allows us to act even when, we're not exactly sure what the way forward is. So I thank you for that.
And the way forward is forward.
Exactly.
Right? We can't go backwards. We just can't.
Exactly. So thank you so much for that. And if anybody has any questions that they would like to pose directly to David, there is a Q&A feature in the bottom of your, I would assume, in the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can go ahead and type questions in there directly for David, and I can feed those to them or to him. There's one right now that is kind of a comment / question, but I'll pose it to you, David, and let you respond. Essentially, what has been highlighted is that based on the tiers that you presented, it seems that the focus, if we want to move and create more diversity up at the top of the triangle, is that or at the elite end of the sport, is that we've got to start at the youth and at the local and hyper local area, with a focus on youth at local and hyper local. Any thoughts or comments, or I think it's safe to say you agree, but if you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? When I put together this presentation, I was thinking, okay, how do I explain this part? And that question will come up, and great question, whoever asked it. Here's my thought. Now, once again, I'll use the basketball analogy as an example. Talent scouts, those that look for talent, look for the talent early, look for it early. They do it before they actually get out of high school. So a lot of this conversation in the junior environment has to happen before juniors even become juniors. Right? Okay, think about that holistically for a second. If we're looking at this from a holistic standpoint, we have to dig deeper in the pool of talent, because truth be told, there are folks that are riding bicycles these days that don't really understand the talent that they have, because no one has actually taken the time to look. And that happens across the board, be it workforce or be it in cycling. It's exactly the same. So the recruiters, quote unquote recruiters, have to do a better job and understand how to find talent, how to find it, because it's there. It's there. You look at USA Swimming, it's a perfect example. USA Swimming is there's talent that's out there, but someone has to know where that talent is. It's in the inner cities. It's under the radar. But people have to take the time to look, because it's there. So, and Kelsey and I, we've talked about this is so unique. If we're looking to get to the Olympic level and to gain more traction, to get more people of color and women to that sport, we have to take a deeper dive and understand how to find the talent early. Because we got 4 more years for this, folks. We got 4 years to figure it out. We got 4 years to figure it out. So finding a way to dig deeper before the talent pool of juniors is critical. You look at DC, Washington, DC, there are some folks in DC that are killing it, but nobody knows about it. Nobody knows who these individuals are that ride in these groups and individuals in these group rides that are riding with pros and Cat 1s and Cat 2s, and they're cleaning their clocks. That's talent out there, but nobody knows. We need to do a better job at it. That's my thought.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared and for being a part of really kicking off what is an ongoing conversation. I do see another question has been added. So before you leave, the question is, what is the nature of resistance that you've experienced over the years? And how has it evolved or morphed? Oh yeah, morphed. I've never seen that written out. With the recent racial equity, morphed. That makes more sense. Evolved or morphed with the recent racial equity conversations.
Okay, I'll give you a perfect story. Perfect story. All right, and this will tell you a lot about me. So when I was in corporate America, all right, the notion was, and I'll just say it, is, if you didn't have a degree, you couldn't get to a leadership level. I don't have a degree. Okay, I wasn't given the opportunity to have a degree. Okay, I was raising kids at the time. Okay, I was young. I was 20. Right, So the opportunity for me to get a higher education was not available for me at the time. And a lot of times what organizations do is they shake a stick at it and say, no, look at that talent, no, we'll go somewhere else. And I understand that's somewhat part of the policy and procedures of organizations. But what I had to go through was I had to prove what I was good at doing. So I started out in financial services as a temporary employee and got up to a vice president of diversity and inclusion who was well respected, not only in the organization, but also around the world, delivering presentations on the world stage at the United Nations building. So part of the problem is those that get to that level have how do I say this? What's the word here? Have a decision to make. Do they keep fighting or do they quit? Okay. I didn't quit. That was not my nature to quit. And I could tell you even more stories about that, but that's a perfect example of those that want to get to that level, don't quit. You just don't quit. So the second question was around the racial equity. It's living in New York City is a unique place to be. This is really unique. I can recall there's a place called Flatbush Avenue, which goes out to a place called Floyd Bennett Field. And they had the statue of George Floyd alongside of, I think it was a bank. And it caused a lot of good nature in conversation and some not. I think people are so torn about how things were handled. It's created some strife with some folks. From my perspective, I try to take a big view at it and look at it from why would that person think that way, or why did that happen the way that it did. There's certain things, folks, that we can't change. Certain things that have happened in the past that have happened for a reason. I think what has happened is, and this is an interesting story that I'm about to say, is this whole factor of what has happened with George Floyd is it has actually created companies to stand up, right? And I see, Rob, you're shaking your head, right? It's so true. It's and that just gave me goosebumps, folks. That just gave me goosebumps. It has made organizations and leaders stand up and think, because it's that powerful. What has happened to our community and to our country and to the world overall is beyond recognition, folks. And you might have heard this comment before, yeah, the new normal, but no, folks, this is called the new world order. This is how work is going to be. It's going to be this way. And it's going to be how things are going to be and how people will interact with each other and how they're interconnected. And if they're not interconnected, we got to do a better job at it. So when it comes to building more representation at the higher levels of the elite level of sport, it all starts here, folks. It all starts here. This is a once in a lifetime situation that we're talking about here, Okay. So given the opportunity, and when I talked to Kelsey about giving this keynote speech, I was like, let's jump on this, because it is that important for people to see the impact that what has happened in the past, if we don't do anything about it, will continue to happen in the future. And we'll all talk about the same things over and over and over and over again. What does that call? That's insanity, folks. I said my piece.
All right, we've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
And comments. So mini compliments. But one here is, as a DEI consultant, the subject of cultural competence and allowing people of color to be allowed to speak in their natural voice and act in ways that are germane to our upbringing and cultural values without having to assimilate to be respected. This is something that is critical, yet rarely gets the time or emphasis needed. Can you speak to this?
No, without question. All right, let's go back to the framework. Okay, I'm going to share with you the framework. So Kelsey and I have worked on a framework that is so integrated. Okay, the framework deals with these 5 principles, and then I'll answer your question, whoever. And great question, by the way. These 5 principles of how organizations run is 1, leadership commitment. Number 2, employee engagement. Number 3, customer retention and acquisition. I'm going to say that again, customer retention and acquisition. We have to retain who we have and acquire more, okay? Number 4 is a learning culture that's inclusive and is engaging for people to have a safe environment for growth. Number 5, what are we doing on the outside as it relates to the communities in which we want to do business in? So that very same question that you asked, whoever that individual was, thank you for the question. We have to do a better job in organizations clearing the way and having tough conversations around diversity and inclusion, tough conversations around it. Because I can tell you I think we've all experienced this. Words have power. Right? Words have power. And the things that we say, we don't know we say. And we will get into these conversations over the next couple months around bias, okay? It is so important for people to understand the words that they say because they have meaning. And that meaning can either make or break a relationship across the board. So the foundation and the DNA has to be prevalent in organizations so that people have a safe environment to talk about diversity along with the business, right? Along with the business, okay? But to have a safe environment to talk about diversity, okay? Those are my thoughts.
Awesome. And then we've got 2 more as of right now. So in terms of breaking the glass ceiling in the workplace, do you think there needs to be a critical mass of diverse people at the executive tier before things really start to change? And then the second part, how much impact can 1 or 2 diverse people have on a whole board?
Okay. So ask me the first question first.
Okay, I asked the second one in the wrong order too. Okay, so in terms of breaking the glass ceiling in the workplace, do you think there needs to be a critical mass of diverse people at the executive tier before things really start to change?
Yes and no. Yes and no. But what tends to happen is progressive organizations that have the wherewithal to develop people across the board based on talent and people of color and women will grow faster. Okay, but this is so hard to say. The challenge then becomes is we have to be able to find the ability to ensure that when people are in those executive positions are doing the right things and pulling people up, okay, and making it clear that here's what you need to do to be successful in this environment. Because I'm going to tell you, folks, when I went from being a manager to a supervisor to an executive, that's a different conversation. It's a different conversation, totally different conversation. And the key thing is people who are at that level have to teach the folks that are coming up, here's what this means here. Because it's different, folks, it's super different. I can recall I was at a board meeting and we were, part of HR. HR was at the table, communication was at the table, blah, 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 blah. And the conversation that we had that day was so pointed. And a lot of times people have to take a real strong step and see, and this I think people will shake their head on this one, that you have to look at your moral compass. Okay, you have to look at your moral compass because at the level of executive, there's big business decisions being made. And you have to look at your moral compass and say, okay, can I be a part of this moral compass and know that there are certain things that I might not agree with. And sometimes that doesn't go with people's mindset. And that's the hard part. So what's the second question there, Kelsey?
I think you've essentially answered the second one as well, but it was how much impact can one or two diverse peoples on a whole board really have?
Huge, huge, because the perspective then becomes, okay, here's what I have seen from how I've gotten to where I am. Let's look at this from a more inclusive perspective, and how can we, instead of doing the same things over and over, here's one. Instead of doing the same things over and over and over again and just changing the words and still getting the same lack result, diverse folks on boards have an opportunity to change the dialogue around that, to change the dialogue around that. Okay, super important, super important. And at the same time too, having HR at the table is critical. And Rob and I, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Having a strong HR person at the table is super important for change. Super important for change. There you go, Kelsey. Next question.
All right, we've got two final questions.
Sure.
They're both kind of actually, well, one's a question, one's more of a comment, but I'll let you speak to it.
Sure.
So this individual says, it seems that you're judging success based upon medals and championships, but I think you're missing the point. The process should be to use cycling as a tool to become better humans within the community, which will drive conversations and increase trust. Leaders will rise from these interactions. Cycling must not always be about winning, but about the journey.
Correct. I agree with that. I agree with that. Once again, that's perspective. That's perspective. My perspective is different than your perspective. It doesn't make it wrong, doesn't make it right, right? But it is what it is. So that's diversity, right? And that's inclusion. Everybody has a perspective. So I think what happens is when somebody has a thought process or an ideal, and someone disagrees or agrees with it, it's like, oh, I don't, but you can use your discernment, right? You can use your discernment. I can agree with that, or I don't have to agree with that. Everybody has a process and idea of the way that they think about this work, or how they view their lens of diversity. So it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it what it is, makes it what it is. And that part of what you're saying is about medals, this, that, and the third. But in truth, in some cases, that's true. In some cases, that's true. If you look at the Olympics, why do we do the Olympics? Why do we do it? Country after, we battle from country to country, sharing things across the spectrum of the world. Who's better at this sport than the next person? Or what country is better at this sport than this country? That's just the way I think. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead, Rob.
I just want to add to that comment. I refuse to accept that is an or decision. It's an and. Inclusion will put more people in the pipeline. And the reality that we do face as an organization is 50% of our funding is based on performance. So if it's discounted, we'll lose our power, but it has to be dealt with as an and decision. A more diverse cycling community will deliver more performance. I don't want to make that the tyranny of that being an or type of choice. And we have to live up to it, and it's not easy. I acknowledge all that. But I do want to acknowledge the connectivity between more diverse people cycling and the country performing better on the world stage. They are directly connected.
Bingo.
And David, that's our version as a nonprofit of business is stronger with it than without.
Wow. Folks, say that again, Rob, so people can get that.
I mean, 50% of our funding, roughly, I'm using rough numbers, comes from how we perform. And how we perform in Tokyo influences how we are funded for Paris. It is how this organization is built. But I do believe strongly, and I do believe strongly that more people in cycling, just simply more people, and by definition, based on your comment about majority, minority changing shape in this country, that's people of all colors, types, sizes, and orientations.
Bingo.
If they're in the sport, we will be a healthier community and we will win more.
Yep. There it is. Couldn't have said it better. Well done.
Okay, and then one final question, and I would like to just highlight this. We will be having a panel specifically on this topic in the future. Obviously, it was originally planned to be a part of this same day, but I accidentally sent the question to answered before I answered it. How do we make sure individuals with disabilities are treated the same when it comes to being included in growth of the sport? And again, before you answer, David, just to highlight, we will have a panel specifically on this topic further down in these monthly conversations.
I will go first level. Every individual has to understand themselves before they can understand others. Clearly, because if we don't do that first, we will make pre-consisting judgments on people. I mean, I think that's the frontier of the whole thing, is we have to understand ourselves and see exactly where we are, so that we understand when it comes to athletes with disabilities or abilities, okay, abilities, all right, that we take a broader look at the individual, regardless of their ability to perform. Regardless of their ability to perform, okay? And I've seen some, matter of fact, okay, once again, I'll tell you stories. I was at a race this past weekend in Baskin Ridge. It was for the Tour Somerville. Well, Tour Somerville didn't happen because of the whole storm stuff. But there was a gentleman who was racing his bicycle with one arm and did extremely well at it. To me, that's impressive, because he did not say, okay, I can't be a part of this because everybody I can be singled out because I only have one arm. He was at the top front of the pack, and it was a category 3 race, and he was crushing it. So we have to look individually and say, okay, it doesn't matter what the person's ability is, they can perform, because it's all about the mind, body, and spirit. Mind, body, and spirit. Regardless if you have one arm, one leg, whatever. If you have the will to perform, go get after it. Get after it. Get after it. So, my thoughts.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. And no doubt, we're going to have a lot more conversations moving forward. And so some of the questions that David was able to address or speak to right now, we will actually be going much more in depth to in the months to come, as we have panels and groups of speakers talking specifically to those various topics. So David, once again, thank you so much for being here with us today and for that message. And what it really, I think, highlighted for me, and this would be a takeaway, I hope, for everyone, is that, you know, we're all arriving here at this conversation and this conversation series from different places, different backgrounds, different levels of experience, as well as different personal and professional responsibilities and obligations to be a part of this conversation about really being agents for change when it comes from diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think already what today's conversation is highlighting for me, and what my vision and our hope and our vision was for this series, is that no matter where you're coming from or what your role is, these conversations are going to be relevant to you. And all of us have a role to play in the conversation, and in, you know, the actions that are taken out of that. And so I hope that is what everyone else on the line joining us is feeling as well. As, I mean, you could be the most experienced or least experienced, but we're all going to walk away with some convictions and some tools and resources, and hopefully a level of accountability, actually go out and be agents of change. So thank you for that, David. And I'm going to now hand it over to Ashland Johnson. She is the of the Inclusion Playbook. We mentioned her already. Rob did in his opening comments. The Inclusion Playbook has been absolutely instrumental in bringing together what was originally the Inclusion Conference and is now this Inclusion Conversation Series. And so I can say very personally, I'm so thankful for the guidance and wisdom that, well, David as well, but specifically to hand over to Ashland, the Inclusion Playbook has been able to provide and continues to provide for us. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you now, Ashland.
All right, thank you so much, Kelsey. It's been an honor to work with you, your task force, Rob, and your entire team on this important initiative. And for those of you who showed up online today, thank you so much for being here. As David mentioned, you are all key to these conversations and helping us create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive spaces in cycling. We're looking forward to engaging with you over the next few months throughout this series. Again, my name is Ashland Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the president and founder of the Inclusion Playbook. We're a sports impact consultancy that works primarily with sports leagues and organizations on their diversity, equity, inclusion, and social responsibility work. Over the past few months, we've been working with USA Cycling to develop the content and agenda for their inaugural conference. So to close us out today, I'm going to just give you some highlights of the series, give you information about the timing, our goals, and the topics we plan to cover. So now, because we can't all come together in person right now, the initial conference has been reimagined as a series that will take place over the next few months. We will host a virtual session on the first Thursday of each month. The first 3 sessions have already been posted online, and we will run them through December. And in December, we will reassess our safety concerns and post the additional series sessions, and with the hopes of coming together maybe in the spring of summer to close out the conference. So it's important to note that while we have switched to an online format for now, future sessions will be structured to foster engaging, authentic, and dynamic conversations with all of you. For example, each session will have interactive components. This includes polls and breakout sessions where we can engage you all and learn from each other. Lastly, throughout the series, we will touch on a variety of different diversity, equity, inclusion topics. As Rob previously mentioned, the goal of the series is to both educate and expand inclusion in the cycling industry. So we have designed a series of sessions where we can both listen and learn from industry experts and from each other about some of the most pressing DEI issues that your community is facing today. So on the display, you'll see a list of sessions that we plan to cover throughout the series. So our first 3 sessions, that will be October, November, December, will focus on unpacking race, gender, and socioeconomic status in cycling. Next, we'll do an implicit bias 101 training. And then we will also discuss leveraging research and data in your DEI initiatives. Again, the goal of these initial conversations is to, 1, set the foundation for having these broader DEI conversations and giving you the tools that you need to walk away from these conversations to create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive spaces in your own cycling communities. Later, we will cover cycling and social responsibility, allyship and action, reimagining disability and inclusion, and engaging diverse communities, building diverse and inclusive workforces. And then we will talk about the future of DEI in cycling. So again, we encourage you all to make as many sessions as possible because we are planning on them building on each other. But if you can only make a few sessions, it's not like you're going to be lost if you can only make the first session and the 4th session. But again, we can't have these important conversations be as dynamic as we need them to be without your participation. So we look forward to having you all be a part of these important conversations. Please be on the lookout for the next registration link and share them broadly among members of the cycling industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashland. And just to wrap things up for us today, I just want to reiterate that we will have on our website already, we have the registration links and dates and times posted for our October, November, and December sessions. They're free to attend. We would encourage you, hopefully we'll see you all on all of them. But please also share them out to the broader community, people that you think might be interested, and those that it'd be great to have a part of this conversation. We're really thankful for the fact that we are able to share them out and make them readily available to up to 500 people a session. So don't worry about getting too many. And if we get to 500, we'll figure that out later. But absolutely, we would love to have you be a part of these ongoing conversation. And as Ashland said, each one each of the sessions is designed to build on the one before it. We are recording them. We will make the content available. So even if you aren't able to make it every week, or sorry, not every week, ignore that, every month, first Thursday of the month, you will be able to gain those resources. And I would like to say as well, please feel free to send us any questions, comments, or feedback you might have. We have an email that I can monitor at USA Cycling that's literally just inclusion@usacycling.org. And that would be a great way for you to be able to, send us thoughts as you go away and are thinking about what we talked about today and even the schedule of what's to come. Please feel free to give us feedback, send any questions you might have through. Obviously, your questions might change over the course of months, since we've moved from a 2-day session where we asked you questions and they were going to be answered in 2 days to now we have months to address them. So please feel free to engage with us. We would love that. And I would just like to close with highlighting, I've been at USA Cycling for about just over 2 years, and looking through the participant list that I see here, this is the most groups, organizations, brands, companies, clubs, teams, you name it, that I've ever seen together in a conversation within this industry. And that was really the hope and dream of this conference/now conversation series, was that we could create a space where the entire industry could come together and we could listen, learn, and grow from the experiences, stories, and expertise of members of the underrepresented communities, as well as the broader cycling industry. And so I just think it's worth highlighting that. And this wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So as Rob mentioned early on, thank you again to SRAM, Strava, Allied, Trek, Canyon, Victoria, Hyperice, People for Bikes, Gooder Glasses, Zwift, and Hinshaw Design. You're making this possible. And so thank you for being here. We hope to see you again first week of October. As a reminder, you can find all the registration links, and we are asking you to register for each one individually, just so that we can kind of keep tabs of who's planning on attending each of the month sessions. But please do share the invite. Everyone's invited. It's free to join. And as Ashland highlighted, the real work, the real power of these conversations is going to be the interaction and engagement of all of you. So please join us again first week of October, and thank you for being here today. And thank you to everyone that contributed directly to this conversation. And finally, thank you to all of our speakers who are on the original conference agenda, who were willing to be a part of this really important and critical 2-day conversation, and have now been willing to pivot and adapt to be able to do it virtually. I know that wasn't easy, nor was it what any of us really wanted, but as we've mentioned, I think it's going to be even more impactful. So thank you to all of our speakers who you either heard from today or will hear from in the months to come. So happy Friday, everyone, and we'll see you again first week of October. Thanks all. Oh, and you can see the link to register in the chat that was just added by Tom. If not, you can type in USA Cycling Inclusion Conference and you'll get the links there. Thanks all.